Hello, my name is Jenny Macdonald. I'm the director of SoloSIRENs, and I'm a theatre maker and facilitator. And I'm here with Jen Coppinger. Jen, maybe you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Jenny. My name is Jen Coppinger. I'm the head of producing at the Abbey Theatre.
And we're in the Civics Studio Theatre in Tala, which is where the SoloSIRENs Festival took place. So, Jen, we're just going to have a conversation mainly about 5x5, which was really important, hugely beneficial to the SoloSIRENs Collective and then to the development of the whole SoloSIRENs Festival. So it would be great to just hear a little bit more about what 5x5 is, what it aspires to do.
Brilliant. Well, we're very proud that that's the case for SoloSIRENs. 5x5 began in 2016, I suppose, the kind of ideas behind it when Neil and Graham took over as directors of the National Theatre. And they were looking at the kind of makeup of a lot of the work that was coming in, and they were realising that it mightn't necessarily be reflecting back what one would read on the census of like what our society is like, what nationalities we have, what diversity are in our streets and on other stages. And we wanted to make sure that we gave a platform on the national stage for it to be the case that actually it was reflecting back the reality of Ireland. So we opened a call. Now we're in our third cycle of it. So 3 years ago we opened a call to invite people who felt that them as an artist or as a community had not been represented, and 5x5 was giving them the opportunity to feel that representation and to feel that support from the National Theatre. So 5x5 is quite a catchy and yet simple name because it's 5 weeks in the Peacock Theatre in 1 year, with 5 groups, each having one of those weeks, and each of those groups having €5,000 to help fund all of the people to be paid. And also if they have any extra things, some of the groups are not necessarily from Dublin, so they might use some of the money to accommodate themselves, travel, etc. And then they use those 5 days in the Peacock to develop a piece, and whether they want to have a public-facing aspect of it at the end of the week, or want to have an invite only, or indeed a closed-door policy, that's fine. We try and not direct people in any kind of agenda of our own, other than the agenda being, please develop something that you think is really important to you and that you want to say. So that's been going on. You were like in cycle 2, and we've had 15 groups, but sadly we've had to say goodbye to one of the groups on the Thursday of the week of the famous week of March, where we had to close the theatre. So the Men's Shed from Dundalk had to pack up their bags and go back to Dundalk, and they will hopefully get their Friday and their public viewing part of the day in another date. And we also had White Cane Audio Theatre that we need to give them a space when we can come back to a non-COVID world in the Peacock. But we've had really interesting groups in over those 15 groups. It's very varied, and actually for what we're talking about today, interestingly, primarily the groups have been female-led, and that's been quite interesting to us. There's been more than SoloSIRENs have been an all-female kind of representation as part of 5x5. How was it for you guys? How was those 5 days?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, I'm really intrigued that there have been so many women involved, and particularly female leadership, because something that we really felt, I mean, you mentioned like it was about the National Theatre giving support, allowing representation, and we felt hugely supported. And I remember the first meeting actually that we had, and it was, I think, you, me, and Jennifer Webster, SoloSIRENs producer, and you said, the space is yours. You really have the space, and it is your space to use as you wish. And that was really exhilarating. And then I think initially we all found it a little daunting, because one thing that women sometimes don't do is take space. Yeah. And certainly something that patriarchy doesn't always allow women to do is to take space. Yeah. But what was interesting is, having been given that space by the National Theatre, I think we all then felt we have to absolutely make the most of this. And it was really fun to listen to performers' phone calls every lunch, because on the Monday it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to do this, I'm doing that, and I'll be home by this time and we'll get this done. And by Wednesday it was like, look, I don't know what time I'll be home. I don't know what's for dinner. Sort it out. I'm at the theatre.
Great.
So there was this real, like, we're working on a show this week, and that's what we were doing. So that was incredibly important. But I guess another reason the female part interests me is that I think when it comes to community engaged work, there's also a space issue sometimes. So community engaged work tends to kind of like find its place and grab its places around the edges of things. And in one sense, actually, that's very freeing, and it allows for enormous creativity. And then sometimes I think it can feel under-supported and underrepresented in a similar way, I think, to what women may feel in theatre and in society as a whole. But no, we certainly felt that support. And to do the first version of the show that became Falling, which was presented as the final show in the SoloSIRENs Festival, so the devised piece by the collective, to have the first version of that happen on the Peacock stage in June of 2019, then to be able to let it rest for a moment, let the feedback sink in, and then go back to it and continue to work on it, which is also often something that community engaged work doesn't get, a chance to go back to develop something first and then go back to it. And then to come in and present it in, the collective is very much Tala-based. So to bring it back here, having developed it at the National Theatre, was a really beautiful order of business.
Brilliant.
And I was saying to you before we started chatting that one of our performers on the second night of the performance or so it was the first night actually, because it was a post-show discussion, an audience member with the best of intentions said to one of our performers, "Oh, so this was your first time on stage?" And Ruba Eliage said, "Oh, no, my first time was in the Abbey."
Nice.
So it was a lovely moment that came out of it.
So important.
Yeah. So Jen, you mentioned there that it's like there was a lot of female-led groups in 5x5. You are a leader in theatre, and you occupy a very important position in Irish theatre, and you're a woman. And where do you think we are at right now? What do we still need to do? We've had Waking the Feminists, we've had Me Too. Within your own experience and your own work, what still needs to be done?
Well, I think we can't take anything for granted. I think we need to have the passion that we had in 2015 remain. Like when Waking the Feminists, I was quite involved in the ticketing of the Waking the Feminists events and in the kind of practical aspects of those events, as well as being hugely passionate about what we needed to achieve. I don't think that's we're not fully there ever.
Not there yet,
And I mean that in Irish society as a whole. I feel the Abbey is doing really well in our gender balance in terms of so proud to see Lisa Tierney-Keogh have her main stage Abbey debut last September with a lot of her Waking the Feminist peers at the opening night. That seemed like maybe something that was going to be impossible 10 years ago, and now it's really possible. But we need to keep on making sure that those opportunities and those spaces are available for women. I think we need to encourage each other all the time, and that is something that the patriarchy aren't anti people encouraging each other. That's up to us. We can't blame anyone for that. We just need to take responsibility and do that. I sometimes get disappointed when I see applications come in, because I can be on a number of panels when I'm reading applications, whether that's for a national theatre or for other organisations, to see that there's still a gender imbalance. So women are not necessarily always putting themselves forward, and it's really hard to give an opportunity to someone if they don't ask. So we need to encourage people to ask. We need to be strong enough to ask as well, and we need to keep on not taking for granted that something is just like, we need to ask for the opportunity but also push for the opportunity as well. So I think that's really important. And with regards to Me Too, I think the only thing we can do is create safe spaces for people, make sure that we all go with the bullying and harassment policies that happen in a lot of organisations. Irish Theatre Institute have been doing a huge amount of work since I think 2018. All of that's very free and available for people to work from. Make sure we have those spaces, make sure people know they can speak to someone or speak out if they need to. And again, that's about encouragement, and it's about making sure that there is space for people.
Yeah, that's very helpful to hear. Yeah. And interesting that space comes up again. So both the making of space, which I think programs like 5x5 do, it's something that we aspire to do with SoloSIRENs. It's about making space for women's voices and stories to be heard. But I think you're right that making space is also about taking space. And there's something really insidious about the way that patriarchy kind of gets right inside you. Yeah. And that was also an experience that I had in 5x5. I think it may have been the first week that on a project I was in a completely all-female space. And we talked a lot as we were preparing SoloSIRENs about whether it needed to be all-female. And then just by accident of who was helping us in the Abbey, we had Laura Honan on the lights and sound, and we had Orla Burke stage managing us. So it really was all female. And something I'm still trying to kind of put my finger on is a way that I felt actually physically changed by that. I found myself kind of like standing up straighter and not second guessing things that I was saying as a facilitator and a director. And I don't think I even realized I perhaps had been second guessing before, but suddenly there was just this kind of exhale. I was like, okay, this week, it's like we're here and everybody wants everybody else to succeed. And so I agree with you that I wonder a bit about this idea that patriarchy isn't anti-support, because I do think patriarchy comes with a lot of other bedfellows. And one of those is a kind of extreme individualism or some of the mythology that you can make work on your own. And it's about being like the most assertive and the most kind of solo. And that's, I guess, something we've explored a lot with SoloSIRENs because it's in the name. Like there's the solo and there's the sirens. But I think we've kind of inherited some myths and that maybe we're done with from patriarchy,
I think
from capitalism.
So, but I think it's time to kind of move on from that as well, because that's just another kind of win for the patriarchy if we don't.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we just need to go like, why aren't you applying for that? Throw your hat in the ring. You're as good as anyone to do that. Yes. So the more, and actually you're also like working that muscle. If you're an artist to apply for something, that's really hard to do. But if you've applied 10 times in a year versus 1 time in a year to do something, I'm not taking for granted how difficult that can be. I have been a freelancer for many years and it's really hard to do those applications. But the more you do it, the easier it is. And actually it enables those opportunities. You might get feedback, then that'll help with your next application, etc., etc. I'm a producer, I'm really practical, so that's how my mind works, and that's why I think that kind of attitude will help with opening up opportunities very, very much. And with applications like something like 5x5, we intentionally set a really, I think, straightforward and easy application process. Absolutely. So we weren't expecting people to do 2 weeks of work. You could put aside half a day if you're really focused about what you wanted to do and put in an application. So I think, maybe that's some feedback that we can feed upwards to funders, and like, please allow us the space to be able to think about the work and to not be thinking about the bureaucracy necessarily. Yes, and maybe to not always be thinking about product, because that was something else you said to us very clearly in the first meeting. You said this is an exploration space. And in some ways you were also saying to us, really don't feel that you have to put something on stage at the end. Now, I think it was really useful for us to do so and to have an invited audience in. And again, it meant that for that invited audience, for some of those people, they had never been in the National Theatre. So in some ways it also widened who was having access through our participation. It's really exciting to see that. It's really exciting for us to have a new audience that comes in. That's amazing. But it's also brilliant to see how proud people are to be able to share their work. Absolutely. But for me, I've produced so many development weeks that turn into a rehearsal for a 1 hour presentation that it's sometimes that you don't get a chance to develop the work properly. So it was really important that we didn't put pressure on people, but then supported them if they needed to have that public facing aspect of it. Yeah, and I think that was that time, that spaciousness and that care was very important to us as a group. It's part of the ethos of SoloSIRENs and of the festival, and I think to have the National Theatre, to come into the National Theatre and find that same ethos in the 5x5 program was a beautiful kind of cross-fertilization for us. And then I think for all of us who are part of SoloSIRENs and for the SoloSIRENs collective as women in theatre and as society, I think it has given us
more strength to do the
Great.
things that you're saying, like to
Yeah.
go, I'm going to apply for that,
Yeah.
and and I'm gonna try this, and this is my
Yeah.
idea, and it might not be perfect, and it might
Yeah.
not be, perfectly formed yet, but I'm going to practice saying
Exactly,
it,
exactly.
and putting it out
Or to even feel like maybe I have a story that's really important to tell. It's
Yes.
it's, sometimes we feel like our stories aren't as important because of years and years of thinking and hearing that they weren't.
there.
So like it's really interesting to see that shift.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for
Pleasure.
for our participation in the program, for your role in creating the program, and also really helpful to hear those thoughts with all of your experience on where we are at this time in this whole discussion about gender, about other forms of exclusion, and I suppose how we can make like an arts and a cultural ecology that allows all of those stories to be heard.
Great. We
So-
could keep talking for days.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Thanks, Jen.
So thanks for being here, Jen. All the best.